Episode 4, The First Payment. Let me tell you something before we go on. I did not have any grand plan. I just had a deadline in Courthouse Inc. and a little money starting to pile up where it did not belong. Once you start counting it for real, you learn what it costs. Money comes the way most difficult things come, in its own time and not without a cost of your own. When you are young, you can think of a large sum as only a number. That is easy enough to understand. But getting there, once you start holding it in bills that have passed through other hands, money takes on a different weight. It quits being arithmetic and turns into something you can feel. That first week, what I brought in lay thin and hopeful in the kitchen drawer. Mama kept for twine, spare buttons, and all the little things a house never seemed to stop needing. By the second week, with Cass moving jars for me, the drawer did not want to close. I started stacking the bills flat under a folded dish towel, as if neatness could guard against loss. I smoothed each one with my palm, not because paper needs smoothing, but because I did. I was getting excited at the prospect of making enough money to stop having to do all that and get back to my life. Our house smelled of cornbread, wood smoke, and that faint metallic tang that clung to my clothes no matter how hard I scrubbed. If Mama and Daddy noticed, they did not say anything. Mama moved through the kitchen steady and quiet, setting plates, rinsing beans, wiping the table in slow circles that looked more like thought than habit. Some nights, when I counted the money, she sat nearby with her sewing and smiled that gentle smile of hers. It made me feel she believed in me and believed I would succeed. I know she did not bless what I was doing, but she did not condemn it either. She just stayed there with me, and in our family that counted for more than talk. Daddy filled the house differently. He talked about church business, the weather, the price of feed, a neighbor's failing mule, tobacco down east, and whether rain would come in time to matter. If he knew what Mama and I were keeping quiet, he did not ask. But not asking is not the same as not knowing. He knew well enough what Granny Bost had done in her day. He had known it for years. His own mother died when he was still a boy, and by the time he came into my mother's life, Granny had taken to him like he belonged to her already. She fed him, steadied him, made room for him. He loved that old woman in a way a man does not often say plain. I think that was part of why he never spoke hard of her choices, even if they ran against everything he stood up and professed on a Sunday morning. He never loved Granny's land the way Mama did, and I know he did not love it the way Granny had. To Mama, it was still living ground. To Daddy, it was a burden left behind, something that asked for more than he cared to give. Maybe he knew too much about what it had cost to hold on to. Maybe every fence line and ragged patch of field carried some old debt he never felt easy claiming. He did not want the land badly enough to fight for it, but he could not bring himself to sell it either. Daddy could let a thing die easier than he could kill it with his own hands. I understood that later better than I did then. So he let the taxes go unpaid. He let the notices come. He let the county move the matter towards sale. But to sell it himself, to sign his own name and hand it over clean, that would have been another thing. That would have made him the one who ended it. Losing a place and surrendering it are not the same in a man's mind, even when the result is. I believe he could bear the first more easily than the second. By the third week, the money had reached a thickness that could not be ignored. One evening after supper, I carried it from the drawer to the table and laid it out in small piles by denomination. The oil lamp made a warm circle on the wood, and the grain of the table showed all its old scratches from knives, elbows, and restless hands. Mama set down her dishcloth and came to stand beside me. Through the open window, cicadas buzzed steady and insistent, like they meant to remind us time did not slow down. She asked if it was close to what was needed, though she could plainly see the answer was no. I told her it would keep growing, but I wanted to start paying the amount down. I told her this stack was for the courthouse, and the next stack would be for the last bit owed. Daddy looked up from his chair near the hearth. His Bible lay open across his knee, not because he was studying so much as because that was where it often rested of an evening, like another man might keep a newspaper. He did not speak right away. He stood slowly, took off his spectacles, folded them, and set them beside the lamp. Then he came to the table and looked at the money, then at Mama, then at me. He rested both hands on the wood and drew in a slow, deep breath that I thought was going to bring forth his temper. For a second I thought he might sweep the whole stack aside or ask me a question I did not want to answer. Instead, he only asked how much it was. I told him it came to $214.06. The bills themselves made $215, but I knew the true figure down to the penny, the same way I knew the level in a barrel or how many jars were cooling on a plank. He worked the numbers on his own then, lips barely moving, and said it would not be enough. I thought to myself that I still had time. Daddy did not show emotion well. He was a stern man, and a pious one, a farmer, a deacon, a man who believed the world ought to show a straight line between deed and consequence. What I was doing lived outside that line, even if the purpose did not. Still, his words were not harsh. They were heavier than harsh. They were plain. I told him it shortened the distance. It was less owed than yesterday. He studied me then, and I could feel what he was measuring. Not whether I was right, and not whether I knew I was sinning. He was measuring whether I understood the risk, whether I knew what it meant to put hard money into a hole that might never fill. He was looking for childishness and did not find it. He said if I did not finish, that money would be gone, same as the land. I told him I knew that. I told him I was not going to lose either. That was not bravado. It was only the truth as I knew it then. Partial payment meant nothing if the full amount did not follow in a couple more weeks. The sale would still go on, and the winning bidder would only save some money. What I had earned would disappear into a ledger that did not care how it had been paid. Knowing that hard fact only strengthened my resolve to get the full amount in time to keep what my grandmother had fought for. Daddy laid his hands flat on either side of the stack. He did not touch it at first. I think he hated what it was and respected what it represented, and those two feelings were wrestling in him. Then he gathered the bills carefully, aligning the edges with his thumbs the way he aligned everything, as if order itself might keep the world from going crooked. He slipped the money into the inside pocket of his coat and said he would take it to the courthouse in the morning. I nodded. I did not offer to go with him. In those days, the man of the house conducted business at the courthouse, even when the land belonged to his wife's people and the money came out of his daughter's hands. The clerk would speak to him. The receipt would bear his signature. That was simply the way of it. I did not take his doing that as approval. I took it for what it was, him choosing not to stand in the doorway once the thing was already in motion. That night I lay awake, listening to the wind worry at the eaves. I kept thinking about those bills leaving our house and turning into numbers in somebody else's book. Once handed over, they would stop being labor and become only payment, reduced and recorded, with no story attached. In the morning, Daddy dressed with the same care he used on Sundays, coat brushed, collar straight, hat set square. He did not say much, only that he was going into town. I watched from the doorway as he walked down the drive with his coat pocket heavy. Backlash lifted his head from the pasture, looked once, and went back to grazing. The sycamore by the branch stood pale and still. I did not go downtown in Concord much, but I thought about Daddy's trip there. I had seen the courthouse each time we drove down Union Street, so I followed him in my head. I thought about the red brick walls that held heat in summer and chill in winter, ink, dust, old paper, floors worn smooth by generations of boots. I could picture Daddy stepping to the counter and laying out that money in the same neat stack I had made, while the clerk counted it without expression. That clerk was not going to admire anybody's sacrifice. Ledgers do not admire. They only add and reduce things. Daddy came back near midday with the receipt folded in his shirt pocket. He hung his hat on the peg and stood there a second like he had not quite left the courthouse behind. Then he said they had noted the payment, but the balance still had to be paid by the posted date. I took the receipt and read the figure that was left. I already knew it, but seeing it in another man's hand made it feel colder, more settled somehow. We had come a little way. We still had a long way to go. Daddy poured himself a glass of water. Then, without looking right at me, he said that if the rest did not come through in time, They would not give back what had already been paid. I told him I understood, and I thanked him for doing it because I knew it was hard for him. He looked at me then, long enough for me to know he was seeing more than the sum on the paper. He was seeing his daughter doing what he had not done, and perhaps what Granny once had in her own fashion. I do not think that made him proud. I do not think it made him ashamed either. I think it made him tired in a place deeper than tired. He nodded once, like a man accepting weather he could not change, and that afternoon I went back to the barn. The air inside was thick and warm. The old tobacco boards held heat in a close way, and the smell rising from the mash was sweet, sharp, and living. I lifted the lid from one barrel and leaned in. What I was doing had already crossed a line by then. The money Daddy carried to town had seen to that. It was no longer a scheme or a hope. It was risk made visible. I set the still together carefully, tightened fittings, checked the seals, leveled the kettle, and laid the coals so the heat would come even. Sweat gathered along my back, but I would not hurry. There was no room for carelessness now, not with money already sunk and more still needed. Every run had to count. When the clear stream finally began to fall into the waiting jar, I watched it with the kind of attention some folks reserved for prayer. Each drop was time turned into money. Each drop was distance crossed. Each drop said the same thing in a different voice. Not enough yet, not enough yet, not enough yet. Outside, the fields and fence lines looked no different than they had the day before. Notices and receipts belonged to desks and courthouse drawers, not to dirt. Inside the barn, the arithmetic of heat and grain went on. By the time the run was finished and the jars stood in a row along the plank, my shoulders ached and my palms stung where the glass had pressed. I counted twice, covered them with burlap, and banked the fire. That first payment had shortened the distance, yes, but it had taken away any comfort that might have come with pretending effort alone could save us. The folded receipt lay on the kitchen table when I came back to the house, quiet as a warning. Effort did not secure land, only completion could.